The death penalty exists in 33 states of the United States of America. However, in recent years, a much smaller number has actually performed them. Executions are carried out by lethal injection. In certain cases, execution by firing squad is still permitted in Utah and Oklahoma. As a German, coming from a different historical background and being a guest in the United States, I respectfully disagree with the practice of capital punishment. Gatesville, Texas. This is the Mountain View Correctional Facility. A van arrives with a single female inmate inside, barely visible, like a specter. This is Darlie Routier, sentenced to death for the murder of her 2 children. Because of a potential suicide risk, prison authorities have dressed her in a gown made of tissue paper. Mountain View Unit is a prison for women, which also houses the handful of female death row inmates in Texas. She will remain here until her execution, which will take place in the death chamber in Huntsville, some 150 miles away. Looking at the scene reminds me of medieval passion plays of my home, Bavaria.
Darlie, do you have anything to say? Do you have any comments? Is there anything you would like to say? I didn't murder my children.
Darlie Routier, you have been here at Mountain View Unit on death row for how long?
I came here early February 1997.
Which means 15 years now.
Yes, sir.
How does this isolation feel for you? How do you cope with it?
Well, I think that I'm very blessed to have a lot of family, friends, supporters that are very encouraging, supportive in my fight. It is hard. It is a very, you're isolated. You're isolated from the world. You're cut off from your family, from life. So,
do you know what's going on outside? There are elections coming up, for example.
Yeah, I try to stay current on the news with magazines and newspapers because I'm in the work program, and so because I choose to work, I'm able to go into the day room for 2 hours every day and watch TV. So I get to see a lot of, the current news and what's going on through that. I work a couple of hours every day.
What kind of work, if I may ask?
Well, right now I'm crocheting. I do crochet. I'm doing a Dallas Cowboys Afghan right now. So they do cross stitch, embroidery work, and the crocheting for special projects.
And how much freedom do you have, for example, to arrange your hair the way you want to do it? Are there limits to the length of your hair?
Well, there's not limit to the length, how long I can have it. There's not a limit of that. I mean, they do, hygiene is a must in here, which we're women, we like to be very hygienic, we're very clean. But you're very limited, you're very limited to what you have, what you're allowed to have. You can, if you choose to get up and fix your hair, and you can do that if you want to do that.
Some makeup?
Some makeup. They have a few things that you can buy off the commissary, the prison commissary.
You want to look beautiful, even in isolation?
I think as women, I think it makes you feel better if you can get up and do those things, and just, it's part of maybe like makes you feel like that's part of a normal process that you had when you were out in the world. So yeah.
This was Darlie Routier's world in Rowlett, a suburb of Dallas. The neighborhood looks affluent, big homes, manicured lawns. Nothing points to the darkest imaginable crimes. But it was from here, the Routiers' home, that an emergency call was made at 2:31 on the morning of June 6th, 1996. The caller was Darlie Routier.
911, what is your emergency? Ma'am? What? Who did? Hang on. I'm trying to get an ambulance to you. Hang on a minute. What's going on, ma'am?
Two of Darlie's boys were stabbed to death. Her third child, a boy just 7 months old, slept upstairs and remained unharmed. This is Damon on the left and Devon, the older one, to the right. They were 5 and 6 when they died. You were tried only for the death of your younger son, Damon.
Yes.
Which means this made it a capital murder case because he was under 6.
Right.
He was only 5.
Yes.
How do you remember the child, the boy?
How do I remember Damon?
Yes, how do you remember him?
Damon was a lot different from Devon. Damon was a little more shy. He was a big mama's boy. He was the type that, he was more quieter, but he loved to play with all the other kids, but he was more quiet. He wasn't, as loud. And where Devon was more, he was funny. He was always making jokes and being silly. But when they were together, they balanced each other.
Let's assume for some reasons you will be released from death row. Authorities still can charge you with the murder of your other boy. Is that correct?
Technically, they can. The way that the trial was played out, even though I was on trial for Damon's, during the whole trial, it wasn't just about Damon. It was about Devon and Damon. The work that's being done in the case to prove my innocence, it's not going to just prove that I did not murder Damon. It's going to prove that I did not murder either of my children.
Back to the crime scene. As investigators gathered evidence, their suspicions quickly turned to Darlie. Even the first responder soon had his doubts. David Waddell, can you tell me what you saw?
When I first pulled up in front of the house, I saw a man running out the front door. I got out of my car, I yelled at him, had him stop in the front yard to see who he was. It was Darren Routier.
The husband?
Yes, Darlie's husband. I asked him what he was doing. He told me that he did live at the house and he was going across the street to find a nurse who lived across the street.
What was the scene? What did you see?
She was still on the telephone talking to the dispatcher, trying to describe what was going on. I saw the 2 boys in the living room floor. One of them obviously deceased already. The other one was moving along the floor, and she was standing a few feet away from him talking on the phone.
Moving along the floor, meaning?
Just maybe almost like a slow crawl. He was bleeding, gurgling for breath. It was apparent that it was obvious that he was still alive. I'll never forget his face. He was looking up at us with his eyes open, gurgling blood, looking just like he was scared. It was fear.
He knew he was dying.
I believe so. Darren did come back from across the street, and I told him to try to help the other boy, and he did. He tried to help the one in the middle of the living room. I don't recall the names or which one was which, but at one point I remember looking over at him to see if he was helping him, and he was doing CPR, and with each breath there was a shower of blood coming out of the little boy's chest, and it was obvious that he was gone.
And Darlie herself?
Darlie was standing by the bar between the kitchen and the living room. I really wasn't concerned about her boys because she asked me about her jewelry that was sitting on the counter. She asked me if anybody had stolen her jewelry. She told me she messed with the butcher knife that was used to kill her kids. She told me she'd grabbed it and messed up the fingerprints on it. I believe there was an intruder in the house up until we actually searched the house and didn't find one. I thought he was still in the house until my backup arrived and we were able to search and make sure he wasn't. Until then, I was expecting him to come around the corner any time.
And apparently there was no intruder.
No.
It was a day like any other day, you know. I had gone to sleep. The boys were sleeping downstairs with me. And the next thing I remember is Damon on my shoulder. And he was pushing on my shoulder and he was saying, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy." And when I first, woke, I could see a man that was going into the kitchen. Well, I got up. Damon followed behind me.
You saw him because TV was on.
The TV was on. We had a big screen TV behind us.
And light was still on, or
yes, yes. And as I got up, Damon followed behind me. And by the time I got to the corner of the kitchen, I could see the man going out into the utility room, out into the garage.
One thing that I am puzzled about is the wounds that you sustained. Were there not a strong evidence for your truthfulness?
Yes, I believe so.
Can you describe
my neck
describe the attack?
My neck was cut from one side to the other.
Can we still see it?
It was said on the stand that, by the doctor that did the surgery, that the carotid artery was actually nicked, but it was not cut the whole way through. And they said, had it been cut 2 millimeters more, which is a very, very tiny, tiny amount, that I would have bled to death within minutes.
We wouldn't sit.
I would not be sitting here today. Yes. I was stabbed in the arm. I was stabbed.
Do we still see a scar?
Yeah.
Can you lift it higher first?
Can you see it?
Yes. Greg Davis, you were prosecutor in case Darlie Routier. What kind of person did you encounter?
You know, I encountered someone that I didn't expect to encounter. Because when I got involved in this case, the very last thing that I expected was to find a mother who had killed her 2 children. That was a foreign concept to me. So when we got into the case, what I encountered was someone who was depraved, who was evil, who was selfish, who was self-focused, and who was in a state of denial, quite frankly, about what she had done in this case. And when you look at Darlie, you see someone who is caught up in her own life, who wants things her way, who is unhappy with her state of affairs, who's having financial problems, having marital problems, and I think who saw these 2 children as impediments to what she wanted. What we found when we looked at the records was that these people were in such financial straits that they had applied for a loan shortly before the murders, and they had been turned down for that loan because their finances were in such poor condition. They were behind on their mortgage. They were behind on credit card payments. They were living beyond their means. They were living large, as they would say. Furniture, cars, boats, vacations. I mean, they were living a grand lifestyle that if you and I had looked from the outside, we said, these people are doing great. But on the inside, they were hemorrhaging money, and they simply couldn't afford that lifestyle in reality.
Besides, Darlie seemed to have contemplated suicide, writing a note in her diary to her children.
I work for Darlie, trying to get the word out there that she's innocent.
And last resort would be maybe clemency by the governor.
Darlie and I won't accept life in prison. Right from the beginning, she said she'd rather be dead than to live her life in prison for something she didn't do. So we fight for her innocence, for her to be freed, or at least get a new trial.
But worst case scenario, if she doesn't get a new trial, if procedures go on, are you prepared for the worst case scenario?
No, I'm not. I will never be prepared for that. If they kill her, they kill me. So, I know it's a possibility. I hope I'm not here if that happens.
How would you face a moment like that? Is there anything?
I would not watch her execution. I would not watch them murder my daughter. She wouldn't want that. I don't know what I'll do.
But for 15 years now, all appeals have been denied. Darlie is still being kept in this solitary cell, awaiting execution. It looks like a gesture of defiance that Darlie has herself photographed in prison as if she were taking a short break from normal life. From the moment of her arrest, she has proclaimed her innocence. And in Darlie Routier's case, you are completely convinced that the right person is
I'm completely,
convicted.
absolutely convinced. There's no doubt in my mind. And you don't know me well enough to know this. If I had any doubt, I would tell you very quickly. But I do not. No doubt. And you look at the sum total, everything there points to Darlie. There's absolutely nothing that points to anyone else. I had initially some reservation about there were two people in that house. So I was concerned about Darren Routier as well.
This is Darren Routier, the husband who was also in the house. He has since divorced Darlie and remarried. Ever since the crime, he has steadfastly proclaimed her innocence.
This is very stressful, very anxiety. You know, it's just very difficult to see my wife being portrayed as someone she's not. And when the time comes out, you're going to see a totally different picture, because to know Darlie is to love her.
But it's quite obvious to me that the story that she spun was not true. Not even close to the truth. Might give her a mistake or two, but the whole scenario did not fit. Does not fit today. Didn't fit. Didn't fly then, it won't fly now.
I kept asking the police, tell me again, what is her story here? what did she say happened? Let me try to make sense of this. I just couldn't make sense of it using her story. And then when you find, as the police did, the screen that had been cut, and then you find the knife inside her kitchen that had the particles on it that were identical to the particles on the screen that had been cut, then you really have a problem, don't you? Because now you have to believe that an intruder came somehow magically into the home. He then took a bread knife from her kitchen, he cut the screen in a nice neat T pattern, and then he puts the knife back in and then picks up another knife out of her kitchen and commits these horrible crimes. It becomes more fantastic every time that you look at another piece of physical evidence here.
That knife was a rounded tip bread knife. If you've seen to cut bread, it's serrated. That knife couldn't have went in that screen and cut it. What we've found out since...
Why couldn't it do that?
Because it has a round tip. Why would you use a serrated round tip knife when you've got a whole block of knives to cut that screen? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
We do know this. We know that she went to great efforts to stage a crime scene. We know, for instance, the flower arrangement in the den where the two children were, it's staged when it's knocked over. We know the vacuum cleaner in the kitchen. We know that Darlie Routier placed that after the fact. There are bloody footprints underneath there, and those bloody footprints match the footprints of Darlie Routier. Let's go back through Darlie's story, right? The intruder, she wakes up, the intruder's running away from her. He breaks the glass before she ever gets in the kitchen. She chases this man through the kitchen where he then conveniently drops the knife in the utility room for her. So then she backs away and eventually calls the police. The blood underneath the vacuum cleaner again. The blood on the vacuum cleaner. Again, her blood that is shown to be dropping straight down onto the vacuum cleaner. The blood that's on the handle of the vacuum cleaner, that again is her blood, consistent with her actually taking the handle and laying it down. The marks where you can see where the vacuum cleaner was rolled on that floor in the blood before it was dropped on the floor itself. I mean, that's just some of the physical evidence in the kitchen that would contradict everything that she said. Here's the bigger problem with all of the blood and all the DNA in this case. And let's remember, at the time that this case was tried, no case had ever had more DNA samples tested in this state. I mean, we had more than 100 DNA samples tested. We literally were able to create a DNA map for that home and that crime scene. Of all those 100 DNA samples, we had none that were unidentified. All of those samples could be linked to one of three people, either Devin, Damon, or Darlie Routier. There's nothing to indicate that anybody else was ever in that home. So no, there's no intruder. There's no mystery killer. This isn't a new episode of The Fugitive where we have a one-armed man free out here running free. That's not the facts here.
Stephen Cooper, you are Darlie Routier's post-conviction attorney. What's your line of defense?
Well, primarily the issue is that she is innocent in fact. And we have evidence developed since the trial that clearly demonstrates that. And we hope to develop some more with some DNA tests that are pending or that we hope to get ordered soon. The evidence that the state elicited was based primarily, almost exclusively, on opinions of experts who were not qualified to render those opinions. Didn't do the necessary background investigation in order.
Give me one example, please.
Well, the fellow named James Cron came into the scene here at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was horrific, bloody scene, evidence, i.e. blood evidence and other things throughout the house. And he, by his own testimony in front of the jury, said that he concluded in his walkthrough, within 20 minutes of being there, that Darlie did it. And so he formed that opinion without having the blood spatter evidence, without having done any of the forensic stuff that is needed to do in a messy crime scene. He had already concluded that she was guilty. And that biased the rest of the investigation, because from 20 minutes on to the scene, they were then investigating evidence, quote, evidence to prove that she was guilty, not developing evidence to determine who may have committed this crime.
There's one strange, mysterious item, a sock, bloody, found about 75 yards in an alley. How do you explain that?
Well, we know that the sock contained the blood of the two boys. We know that from analysis. I found it strange that the sock was found next to a storm drain, and it was laying out exposed as though whoever left it there wanted it to be found. If you're going to try to hide evidence, you don't do it that way. What you do is you either you throw it in a trash can in the alley, or you throw it down the storm drain, but you don't leave it out there as though it's just a marker. Say, look at me, find me. And that's really what that thing was. And I don't know when that was planted, but I think that was planted by Darlie at some point in the night.
The state's theory is that she killed these children and then staged the crime scene, part of which was taking a sock that had both Devin and Damon's blood on it, as well as faint DNA of my client on it, and took it down the alley 75 yards.
And you would exclude theories that bloody socks levitate?
I would exclude that.
And you would exclude that a bloody sock has wheels and travels 75 yards?
Not this bloody sock. I've seen it.
Do you have an explanation how it was possible that drips of blood of her sons ended up on the back of her nightgown?
I do. I think that when she stabbed these boys so hard, just the motion of the knife going up and down would put some drops on the back of her shirt. They were stabbed hard enough to where the knife went through their body and actually chipped the concrete floor underneath them. That's a lot of force. I think that her hand would have to go back pretty far behind her back or over her head.
Their explanation for how, if she had stabbed the children and then cut herself, how they would all be in these microscopic dots, is that miraculously these pieces of drops of blood flew in the air and landed on top of the blood that was already there from killing the boys. We have experts that says the mathematical possibilities of that happening are just extreme.
Let's not forget that the boy's blood is also found on the front of her shirt. We're not talking about transfers now. We're not talking about smudges where the boys are grabbing or she's rubbing up on the boys. These again are droplets of blood on both the front shoulder of right and left, the right and left, okay? And the patterns are such that we could tell, the experts could tell, that the blood droplets are actually going upwards. And they're on the outside of the shirt, again, consistent with that knife being repeatedly brought up and some of the blood, again, off the tip or the edge, coming up off of there and depositing on the t-shirt itself in both places. Again, the blood of both boys are found on those blood droplets. All of those droplets, all of those patterns are consistent, again, with her using that knife repeatedly to stab the two boys. That's, that's what the evidence shows.
All fingerprints were identified with the exception of one, smudged. And allegedly it might be the intruder's fingerprint.
From what I understand, that fingerprint was not identifiable. It could have been. It was. Obviously, there's fingerprints all over your house. If you live in a house, there's fingerprints on everything. That fingerprint was analyzed, and it was smudged, and you couldn't. It couldn't be read.
Today, it's a big deal for the defense that this must be the fingerprint of the intruder, the alleged intruder.
I think it's probably their last hope, which I don't. The fingerprint is. I don't think there's any value to it.
The fingerprint does not match Darlie, Darren's, any of the police officers, any of the paramedics, any of the detectives, or the boys. So whose fingerprint is in blood at the crime scene?
I think it cannot be identified according to the state's testimony because it's too smudged to...
That's wrong. We have had 4 experts, independent, look at it. Their expert tried to downplay it because if you follow the chain of custody of that fingerprint, they took it out of evidence for 2 weeks. I'm sure they were trying to match it with somebody's.
Well, I've heard that same claim for 15 years now, and I keep waiting for them to produce some sort of evidence that would show someone else was in that home. They can't do that. See, here's the situation. When I'm in a courtroom, I'm bound by certain things. I'm bound by the truth, first and foremost. I'm also bound by rules of evidence and procedure. The Routier family's not bound by any of that. For 15 years, they've been free to make whatever claim they want to distort the evidence as they see fit, to rewrite the testimony at trial. And again, they can make any claim that they want to. I've heard claims about fingerprints, and they fail to back those claims up. I've heard claims about DNA. They don't back those claims up. About every 5 years, there's another new unexplained claim that comes up from the family. But they never, ever produce any evidence that undermines that jury's verdict in this case.
The jury's verdict against Darlie Routier was certainly influenced by this video. It was taken 8 days after the murders. Darlie, released from hospital, seems to have recovered. She is celebrating the birthday of Devon at his gravesite.
Happy birthday, dear David.
Here, on the left, her 7-month-old boy, who had been with his father upstairs when the murders occurred. The video had devastating effect for her, with the public and the jury. Her arrest came the very next day. Whenever she had to appear in court, she had to run the gauntlet.
Was there a feeling of a witch hunt?
Absolutely. Much was made to do about the silly string tape
Yes.
at the gravesite.
Which is not a criminal offense.
It is not a criminal offense. The defense attorney agreed for that to come in. And the theory was that you could look at a woman who's, some days after her children have been slaughtered at her feet and she's been left for dead, that you can look at her, that we, the public, can look at her, jurors can look at her and decide, yes, she's a killer. Yes, she killed her own children. That's absurd on its face, but yet that was the basis for the prosecutor said when he saw that on the TV news that he knew that she had done it.
My sister and her boyfriend had brought silly string because the boys, anybody that knew my boys, they constantly were playing with silly string. Around the neighborhood, they were that was one of the things they loved to do. And so that was done in honor of them. That was done in love of them, of celebration of what they would want. And the prosecution took about a minute of that whole entire day of me on the grave spraying silly string. And that's what they showed the jurors.
I remember the first time I saw that, I was at home watching the news. And I just, as a parent, I'm sitting there trying to conceive of this, how any parent in that position could possibly be doing something like that. It disgusted me. It troubled me. It just, again, it's just one of those things that you want to wrap your mind around. You can't do it. It's inconceivable. I do remember when that was played in the courtroom. And I remember the reaction of the jurors, and their reactions, I think, were the same as when I had seen it for the first time. Disbelief. How can a mother who's lost 2 children be out there laughing, cutting up, joking, and playing around at a gravesite when she's just lost 2 of her children? Because, again, as a parent, I hate to even think about losing one.
Yes, but it is not a criminal offense.
No, but I think it was proper for that jury to see her response.
I would contest that because you would show such a video in the face of punishment.
Well, and let's
That's
also...
where it belongs, in my opinion. The jury apparently saw the video 9 times during deliberations.
Right. Again, her whole story to the jury was she loved her children more than anything in the world. She was a doting mother. She was, would never do anything.
After the trial was over, we repeatedly heard that, we didn't hear anything else but that. The silly string tape, the silly string tape, the silly string tape. And who would have ever thought that you could be sentenced to death on account of silly string?
I think you confronted someone once at a murder scene of a murdered girl. Can you tell me about that case?
Well, I've done more than one at a murder scene. I always look at the crowd and see if I see some inappropriate behavior out there. And on more than one occasion, the killer's been out there in that crowd, and I've confronted him and been successful. One was...
How did it... What did you do? Give me the details. So there was a murdered teenage girl.
One was a fellow named Terry Neal Turner. Terry had been to the penitentiary for beating a woman to death. And shortly after his parole, he kills a 16-year-old girl, sexually abuses her with a tree limb, and beat her to death. So I approached him and asked him if, I said, I understand you're the person that called the police, and that you just didn't ask him anything that incriminated him, that you ran right back in and called and touched anything. Is that right? That's right. And I said, well, there would be no way that you could have her blood under your fingernails, right? And so he looked, and he said, you got me. I killed the bitch.
The prosecution, these people who are in office, they would use that. It wasn't about right or wrong, truth or innocence, or guilt. They would use that to further their careers.
Does a sudden knock like this frighten you?
Yeah, it did. I guess I was really in the moment, but...
Like police all of a sudden coming?
Yeah. I mean, I try not to think. I know that a lot of police are not like that, but they could take the same sort of set of evidence and put it on Darren. The only thing difference was he didn't have the actual can of silly string in his hand, basically. And when did silly string become a weapon?
What could be a motive? The motive for killing your own children?
Well, it's difficult, if not impossible, for the average person to try to come up with a motive, because what we always try to do is say, well, what motive would that be for me to do that? And you can't come up with one. I have seen a mother kill her 2 children, stab them to death because, as she told me at least, whatever that's worth, that she suspected that they had stole some chains out of her purse the night before. So
that was a case you covered.
Yes, and I could tell you a lot of other sea stories like that, but it's not going to make any sense to me when you see that one person kills another over an argument over the next song to be played on the jukebox. Well, how can you can't rationalize that?
Sure.
So, getting into her motives is very, very difficult to try to second guess the way a person who would commit that type of offense, how they would think. You burn up a lot of brain cells trying to figure it out, and you never come up with an answer.
Well, we do understand a fight in a bar and it ends in a killing or a bank robbery that goes awry.
Right.
But something as nihilistic as that is incomprehensible for you as well.
Yeah, it takes a very, very tiny percent of the population capable of doing something of that nature. Could be that they're living a certain lifestyle, and his role is to be the provider. Her role is to provide him the children, the family, and he's falling down on his end of it, so she's going to let God repossess the children. You know, I'm not going to put myself through this problem anymore. Okay, why should I spend my time and energy mothering these children? They're an encumbrance to me now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Wild guess.
Let me tell you one story that I didn't know anything about the case other than what I read in the newspaper. I was just a citizen on June 6th of '96. That was a Friday morning. On Sunday, I'm playing golf. And I'm playing golf, and the what we call the cart girl, the girl driving around with the soft drinks and things, comes up to me on the tee box. She knew I was a defense lawyer, and she says to me, you know, that those kids killed in Rowlett, the mother did it. And I said, oh, really? And they said, yes. And I said, how do you know that? And she said she was at a party that Saturday night with a bunch of Rowlett police. And they said that the mother did not had breast implants, and none of the wounds caused damage to her breast implants. And therefore they knew that she was guilty. And I said, yeah, okay, let me hit my drive, you know. And that's the mentality.
Darlie, will you ever admit to having killed the boys?
I'm innocent. For me, I really feel like the media played a big part. Before I ever got into that courtroom, this had been in the media constantly. The prosecutors, the Rowlett Police Department continuously leaked misinformation to the media. And so a lot of things were fed to the media that were, you know, really biased, and it made people form an opinion based on what they were being fed. And so before I ever walked into that courtroom, I was already, in the eyes of most of those people, if they're to be honest, they had already judged me as guilty without really even knowing any facts.
But you're talking to the media here as well, so...
Yes, I am, sir, but that's
you
different.
You have to be aware of that, and please take note of my basic attitude. Since I'm not an advocate of capital punishment, does not necessarily mean that I have to like you, for example.
Exactly.
I do not know you. I do not have to like you to take that position.
Yes.
Again, I think it just shows her nature. She loves to be the center of attention. She wants people to look at her and to believe an image. I mean, this is who you're dealing with. We saw the same thing in Kerrville when we tried the case the very first day, before we started selecting the jury. I remember the complaint from the defense. It was an odd that she was angry that she had not had the opportunity to get her hair done the night before. We looked at each other as prosecutors, and did we really hear that? Her complaint was that she didn't get her hair done. She didn't look the way she wanted to look. I mean, she's very much on the physical. The outward appearance is always important to her. And she's always trying to sell herself in one way or another.
What looks like a series of glamour shots of Darlie was actually taken on death row. She's only allowed to wear her prison jumpsuit.
Well, I had this one dream, and this is very personal for me. I've only shared this with my mom and my pastor, and it's a very, very personal dream, but I want to share it because it's very amazing. After not too long, I was still at the county and I hadn't been convicted yet. And I had a dream that I was at my grandparents' house. And I came into the house, and Devin and Damon were both in there. And I didn't understand the dream at the time, the significance of Devin and Damon didn't have clothes on, but they were perfect. Their skin was perfect, their hair, everything, they looked perfect. And when I went into the living room, I sat down in a chair, and Damon came and sat in my lap. And in my grandparents' house, there's a big, huge window right in front of that chair. And I started talking to Damon. And I remember I was looking at him, and he looked so perfect. He was just glowing. And he was smiling. And I remember saying, you know, baby, I miss you. And he didn't say nothing. He just kept smiling at me. And I kind of got sad for a minute. And I said, you know, why did you have to leave me? And he just kept smiling at me. And then I just was taking in his beauty. And I said, are you with Jesus? And he just smiled so big. And he just kept smiling. He never said anything, but he just kept smiling so big. And that moment, it was just a minute after I had asked him if he was with Jesus. This bright white light that was so bright, it was like a blinding light, filled that whole room. That whole window that was right there in front of the chair filled the whole room. I woke up instantly. I felt like that was God's way of giving me a comfort to know that they are with Him.
Well, things are moving slowly. We haven't yet had the opportunity to put our best new evidence in front of a judge who can make this decision. But when we get the next round of DNA testing done and the next scientific testing done, I think any reasonable judge looking at it will conclude, and they don't have to conclude that she's innocent. They merely conclude that she didn't get a fair trial in the first go-around, and that, especially considering the ultimate punishment being assessed, that she deserves another day in court.
And if all that fails, there would be still a possibility of clemency. The governor.
We don't do clemency in Texas. They have it, but it's not granted.
In the best of worlds, your daughter walks into this door and is back home. What would you do first?
I wouldn't let her alone. I'd hug her and hold her, and we'd cry. And then hopefully we would grieve together and move forward and fight for others, because this is very wrong. The death penalty is wrong, and it creates more and more victims. And it just has to stop. There has to be other ways. And especially when you have someone, she really is the face of innocence. She is innocent. And once everything comes out and I think maybe things will change.
She always is going to portray herself as a victim, as pitiful, as grieving, as a victim of some injustice. This is what she does, and she's done it for 15 years now.
If you close your eyes and your hopes come true and your dreams come true, you walk out of this here, what will you do first?
Well, I always had this picture in my mind of falling on my knees and my son running into my arms. Of course, he was little bitty.
He's too big for
He was
that
little
now.
then. So now it's like, you know, he'll be picking me up. But I just, yes, I have not got to hold my son in 16 years. Holding my son and you know, my family, my mother. She's been through so much through this. And just being able to grieve, to have a chance to properly grieve for my children that I have not been able to do because I've had to put that somewhere else so I can be strong to fight and do what I need to do to prove I didn't do this.